California looking to introduce UBI, Universal Basic Income Program. Long Beach leaders consider a pilot program basically for universal basic income. And of course, this is targeting some of the people who are economically hurt by what's going on. But of course, there are always going to be people who are going to be on the low end of the spectrum, and that's typically related to choices that individuals make. Says families will have the opportunity to apply to participate in the program, in which they would receive monthly payment to help with essentials such as food and housing. And I thought this already existed in the form of welfare. You've got WIC programs. There are numerous different programs that people who have low economic status already have access to. But I guess California wants to take some more of your hard-earned money to basically give it to other individuals. It says we're going to have a limited number of people involved in the program. And of course, we're going to develop the program over the course of the next few months. And we're actually hiring an equity officer who's going to actually manage this universal basic income. We think it's going to be a huge support for families, especially that are currently, of course, struggling. And typically those who are at this low wage income are typically single moms. Every time you see a call for aid, typically the person that they're interviewing is more than likely a minority and more than likely a single mother. Says it would be for groceries and of course to help out families and to help out my family and friends. She said if approved, the city council, the program would make Long Beach one of 15 cities nationwide that are currently testing out universal basic income. And of course, the question is always, where is this money going to come from? Because states don't, it's not a business, right? States don't go out and offer a service or create a product and then sell that product. The vast majority of the revenue that they receive comes from hardworking individuals such as yourself. So if you ever look at your check and wonder why your check is getting smaller and smaller and smaller, more often than not, it's because of the increase in social programs that we see. And of course, as cities grow larger and larger and larger, and they start, of course, hiring more individuals, there are more elected positions. Those individuals, of course, need to pander to the people, of course, who are going to vote for them, right? And so those who typically that they pander to are typically going to be individuals who are in essence slaves to the state. I mean, if all of your money or if a huge portion of what you live off comes from the state, are you more likely to want a smaller state or are you more likely to want a bigger state? Most of these individuals typically vote Democrat, and yet in most of these states, when you look at places like Chicago, places like New York that is currently undergoing an economic crisis here, these are typically democratic states where individuals are basically robbing from one group of people to give to another group of people. And what happens is that businesses just get tired, rich people just get tired, and they just end up leaving. We've seen that, of course, with the recent layoffs by Disney. Disney saying that they're going to lay off something around 28,000 people. Primarily, one of the biggest culprits is, of course, California. It says the state of California, for its unwillingness to lift restrictions that will allow Disneyland to open. So you have a business, maybe you're, a restaurant owner or you're a barbershop, etc. You have a business. Your business, of course, provides a service. People who enjoy that service want to go out and spend money on that service. And of course, this generates tax revenue for the city. It allows for businesses to grow. And of course, as the employees get paid, they then go and spend their money either going out buying food, restaurants, buying clothing, etc. So there, in essence, there's a velocity of that money. And that's where, of course, when talking about GDP, the more that money basically moves from person to person to person, because maybe, I go out and I spend that money on haircuts, or I go out and spend that money on food. I take public transportation. So now I'm providing revenue for the transportation industry, for the restaurant industry, for being able to pay rent. So instead of living with my family, now I'm living on my own, and so I'm able to pay rent. So that money, in essence, passes through a lot of hands and then is able to provide a lot of services. With the loss of 28,000, that is a lot of course, generated GDP that will be lost, not just for the country, but of course, primarily for the state. So again, as the state is starting to make a lot of these decisions, we've seen, of course, with the attack on Uber and Lyft, trying to make many of these gig workers into employees so that the state has access now to extra revenue because now they're employees. So then now they have to pay payroll taxes. Instead of paying those payroll taxes at the end based off what they've earned minus any deductions, now of course they have to pay those in upfront and hope for some sort of return. California constantly making many of these bad choices, and of course this is all primarily related to the current lockdown situation here in New York. They're thinking of fining people for not utilizing masks, yet whenever you look at the numbers are almost non-existent. Out of the vast population that we have here in New York, which is in the millions, there are literally only hundreds of people that are currently in the hospital for the current pandemic. And yet, like I've said before, we don't know if those individuals, how old they are, what sort of comorbidities do they have? Are they actually in the hospital because they're symptomatic, or are they in the hospital for different reasons that are not even related to the quote unquote positive swabs that these individuals have tested positive for? Just like the president. The president has recently tested positive, but we don't even know whether or not he is symptomatic or not, if he's sick, if he's, of course, had to go into the hospital system. As far as I've heard from many of the tweets, the individual in question is doing just fine with showing no signs or symptoms. And this is the part of the problem where individuals are just basing things off of numbers and not basing things off of the science. Whether we're seeing a rise in hospitalizations, is the curve starting to bend up so that nurses like me become overwhelmed and they can't make the ability to render care the best that they could? No, these are typically decisions are made based off of fear, and more importantly, based off of control. And of course, it's not that we're not understanding to those individuals who are in need, but there are numerous programs like this. And typically, once the government creates these programs, these individuals, one, typically never come off the program, and two, these temporary programs often, of course, become put in place. The other economic impact, which is important to understand, is whenever it's a simple supply and demand. We see it already with the stock market, with the federal government injecting money via bailouts into many of these companies that perhaps should have filed for Chapter 11. They should have already filed for bankruptcy. Instead, they take loans supposedly that they are going to repay, and as a result, we see the stock prices of these companies start to go up. Instead of these companies and of course the market overall being brought back down to a more fair valued price, instead we're seeing overinflated prices within the stock market. This exact same thing, of course, happens whenever the government gets involved with programs like these, where they say like these certain items can only be purchased. The result is that those items then, of course, have an uptick in the price, right? It's just a simple supply and demand. As the government says, we're willing to pay for this, this is basically more of what you get, because as a business owner, I know if the government is going to subsidize these particular products or these particular services, it is to my advantage to, of course, basically sell those products or sell that sort of a service, because I know that there is a demand for it, because the government is artificially creating a demand instead of for it going out into basically the market, and then the market dictating the successfulness of the service or the product itself. And of course, this is only going to raise prices, and of course, it's only going to raise taxes for the average person. I'm always against these sort of programs, particularly because I see it all the time. Whenever I go to the deli by the hospital, there's numerous people who are both younger than me and probably in better, younger and better condition than me, and yet we see them utilizing, EBT cards, etc., or they're using somebody else's EBT card within the family. The the shop owner or the deli owner doesn't even look at the ID, and most of them have like a picture on them. They don't even look at it. They just swipe it. And of course, they buy food. Typically, what we see in these individuals, what I see, they go to the deli and they want to buy a cold cut sandwich. Instead of actually buying cold cuts for the entire week, they pay an overinflated price for sandwich in that moment. Of course, this comes out of my taxes. Every time I look at my check or whenever I have to pay taxes for my business, I always look at it, and it's like so much of it, of course, goes to taxes. Living in Manhattan, I already have to pay an extra fee for the luxury of living here in the city, where there's recently been a rise in crime, where there's been numerous shootings. You have to be careful in what neighborhoods you walk, and this is the extra fee that I'm basically paying for living here in New York. Hope you guys, thanks for watching, and I'll check you out next time. Of course, if you like the content, feel free to subscribe. If you have any questions, if you want to add to the discussion, feel free to do so in the comment section. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.